Britain remains a military power out of all proportion to its economic standing. Its soldiers still fight in corners of the world far removed from this tiny island off the northwest coast of Europe. Hundreds have died in Afghanistan and Iraq in the last decade. I'm Joe Glenton. I was Lance Corporal Glenton of 13 Air Assault Regiment until I was jailed for refusing to fight in Afghanistan. And that's why it's important for me to find out why young men volunteer to risk their lives in conflicts which the majority of their fellow citizens regard as unjust and illegal. But the same question is important for every parent who has a son or daughter of recruitment age, and for every taxpayer who cares how the military spend their money, and for every citizen who cares about the political health of their country. So join me for The Soldier Myth and The War on Terror, a 4-part series that talks to frontline soldiers about recruitment, training, fighting, and coming home. I, Joe Glenton, swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, and that I will, as in duty bound, honestly and faithfully, defend Her Majesty, her heirs and successors in person, crown and dignity against all enemies, and will observe and obey all orders of Her Majesty, her heirs and successors, and of the generals and officers set over me. For what it's worth, the oath of allegiance is the final step before you start training to be a soldier. And this means that in the view of the military, your life is no longer your own. You're going to be sent away to learn the profession of arms. This process will involve months of arduous training under the Army's military instructors. The aim is to fashion raw young men and women into soldiers ready to fight and perhaps die without question. Craig Rutherford, who joined the Royal Logistics Corps, found it tough going.
Basically they'll just treat you real bad and kind of worthless, just to make you to see if it can break. They put you at pushing point, breaking point, everything like that, but I just kept it.
Ben Griffin was an ideological recruit, and for him training was an exciting prospect.
I really enjoyed training. I wanted to be a soldier, and for me the training was the barrier I had to cross to become a soldier.
Matthew Horn joined the infantry and did his basic training at Catterick Garrison.
Training to be a soldier was physically one of the most demanding things I've ever done. Mentally, I thought it was okay.
One controversial feature of training and military life is beasting. I asked Craig how far these extreme physical punishments went.
Basically, until you run ragged, and run into the ground, up and down hills, on your knees, your elbows, you're literally falling apart basically by the end of it.
While to many instructors beasting was considered a character building exercise, there are examples of it going too far. There is a history of soldiers dying after being subjected to beasting punishments. In 2008, Private Gavin Williams of the Royal Welsh Fusiliers collapsed and died after being beasted. None of the NCOs involved was convicted. There is much debate regarding the degree to which soldiers are dehumanised by training. The parachute regiment, which Ben Griffin served in, have a unique take on instilling a them and us mentality during training.
It definitely changes the recruit. It changes you from a civilian with certain values and turns you into a paratrooper with completely different values and a different outlook on life. Your loyalty is to the regiment, your loyalty is to your comrades. So it does change the person. Does it dehumanise them? I'm not sure if it does. It makes you into a different sort of human, but still human. As far as the enemy's concerned, I don't know what it's like in other units, but within the parachute regiment, you dehumanise civilians and you dehumanise other soldiers within the army. So you create this very tight team by dehumanising everyone. And the enemy is probably at the end of a long list of other people that you're taught to, or not taught, but you learn to despise. So civvies become civvy cunts, the rest of the army become crap-hats, and they're despised and looked down on as inferior beings. If anything, the enemy, in my own experience, compared to civvies and crap-hats, the enemy have got a bit more respect, maybe less dehumanised than the others, which is a bit strange and probably unique to the parachute regiment, but that's how it was.
I asked Glenn if he felt there was any truth in the argument that military training turns recruits into machines.
I suppose, to a degree, you are becoming more mechanical, because using the terminology I used earlier in chats, you know, part of a cog, part of a machine, part of a full range of cogs working together, common goal, whatever that may be. So I suppose, yeah, I do agree to a certain extent that they want to change your mindset to accept orders and to do things more efficiently.
To some, the training is aimed at removing certain values, which the rest of us take for granted.
And looking back at training, the purposes of dehumanising and indoctrination are simply to eradicate our natural instincts. Naturally, humans are social. We have what's called empathy. We empathise. It's like a child, or if you see a child abandoned on the street, you don't just leave it. You empathise and you would take care of it yourself. If you couldn't find the mother or the father or someone to look after it, you would end up looking after it yourself. That's the human way, that's the natural way.
The post-9/11 political climate has seen a growth of anti-Muslim prejudice, and many would argue this is part of a wider programme to legitimise the wars. Few Western media outlets miss the opportunity to use buzzwords like Islamism, extremism, jihad or terrorism in relation to Muslims. This despite the fact that in Britain you are statistically 8 times more likely to be killed by a police officer than a terrorist. So given the political space which neoliberalism and imperialism have provided for racist ideas, how much of an issue is racism in the military?
The attitude towards racism, or the actual racism within the army, is consistent with recruiting a lot of people from Wales, Scotland and north of England. That's where these guys are coming from, so that's the sort of level of racism. So I imagine that the level of racism in the army isn't much different to a small town in Wales or Glasgow, north of England. And actually I found a wide opinion, if that's the right word, or a wide variation in the levels of racism with the army. So guys from Burnley, for example, white guys from Burnley, were racist. Prejudice against Muslims, prejudice against people with brown skin. But they're from Burnley. There's a 40% Muslim population in the area. I think, there's been riots, there's been race riots in those towns. So they're going to bring that baggage into the army.
One derogatory term which is commonly used to refer to the native populations is chogies, which is the British military equivalent of ragheads, camel jockeys and the like.
So there is a degree of kind of racism and prejudice in the kind of institution.
Yeah, I would say it would be like chogies, and that was like the main sort of
term.
Class them as, so to speak.
Units that I worked with or came across in Iraq, specifically American units, maybe National Guard or less professional units. So you're talking about units that are full of people who've been actively recruited by an aggressive recruitment policy, economic recruits who are looking for college education at the end of their time in the military. There was an element of racism from these people. They used the term, raghead, Haji, and there was this this idea or this view running through whole units of specifically in my own experience, American units. I'm not sure what it was like in Basra, of units who looked at the Iraqi people as somehow subhuman or inferior.
The racism then seems in part to depend on where soldiers are drawn from. Matt Horn served in a regiment which recruited, as Ben pointed out, from Scotland and the northwest of England.
The military is incredibly racist, but comes under the banner of banter.
So racism and Islamophobia in the military exists at similar levels to normal society. But does racism exist at the strategic level?
I'm not sure, because the tactics or the strategy that's been used in Iraq and Afghanistan is that there are good Muslims and bad Muslims, or there are good Afghans and bad Afghans, good Iraqis, bad Iraqis. And we're quite happy to work with and whole sections of those countries, whole sections of the population. In Iraq, we started off by backing the Shia, and this was an American-led strategy, I suppose, and then there was a turning point, I can't remember the exact year, where we started backing the Sunni awakening, started backing the Sunnis. Now, previous to that, the Sunnis were the troublemakers, the Sunnis were the Baathists and related to Al-Qaeda. So there's a cynicism about our approach to this. I don't think there is really much racism at a strategic or an army-wide level, because we're quite happy to change our allegiances and to work with these people and exploit these people's prejudice.
So at the highest level, there is a much more cynical approach. Racism, it seems, is just another PR tool as far as the military and political commanders are concerned. So while it's clear that the majority of soldiers are not overtly fascistic, the army remains an inherently right-wing institution, based on absolute power, top-down obedience, and service to narrow elite interests. Whether in an effort to educate soldiers on proper conduct or as a public relations exercise, basic training includes a series of lectures on military ethics, the law of armed conflict, and the values and standards of the British Army. These were carried out by a padre or military priest, and I can remember being brought into these lessons by our instructors in basic training.
Sit down and shut up, basically.
Yeah.
It was as abrupt as that. And yeah, I suppose when it came out, they used to take the mick and say, what did they teach you today? Because there was a video on, I think, how the Russians discipline, I suppose, and the lack of it. And he said, did they show you a video on that? It's like, yeah. He says, well, ignore all that, really, basically. That's probably the only time, really, they said similar to what you said, but most times just shut up, listen to what you're told. If I have to come in there, we'll beast you.
We probably did have, in basic training, some mandatory lessons on maybe the law of armed conflict or something like that. But from what I remember, those were good periods. The limited periods we did have were good periods to have a sort of rest from, getting hammered up a hill or getting shouted at or getting, So they weren't, and they weren't part of the test that you needed to do to pass, so they weren't really that important.
By the time the soldiers have completed training, their instructors hope they will have been reconditioned with a new set of values, as well as a sense of entitlement derived from the arduous process they have endured.
So you completed training, you went through all of that work, and when you came out, did you feel empowered? You were a soldier now, Glenn Humphreys, shadow warrior.
Yeah,
that's a bit over the top,
yeah,
but you were proud to be a soldier.
People turn their heads when they're looking at you in your uniform. Even when you drove home on a weekend, sometimes you hadn't got enough time to get changed. Or, in fact, I like to just show it off sometimes.
Really?
Yeah, I loved it. And
that was against the rules then, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You weren't supposed to walk around in uniform, which they've changed more recently.
Well, they changed it, then they said he could, then they said he couldn't. But sometimes you know what Colchester's like. I wanted to get home.
Yeah.
So you just get my kit and just go home. And I enjoyed, because everyone would look at you, because you're a soldier, and people, I suppose, admire what we do, or what we do. I don't do it no more. What I did.
Yeah, I think training, especially to be a guardsman, is a bit similar with the paras and the Gurkhas, is that it's more of an honour to be classed as a guardsman, para or Gurkha, as opposed to the infantry in general. It's not that, every regiment's told they're the best. That's generic. That's the way it is. You've got to incite that regimental, pride, stuff like that.
But the guards really are the best, aren't they? Blue, red, blue. Is that right?
That's what they say.
Do you still carry some of that stuff with you?
You still no? Is it gone now? That sense of being part of an elite.
I'll always be proud of what I did in terms of training, because I think I accomplished quite a bit in my own self. When I was at school, I was bullied. A lot of people picked on me. I was quite small, so for me to achieve something like that, which probably most of these people that are bullies probably wouldn't, and indeed many people in the population itself wouldn't be able to do it. So for me to achieve something like that as this small scrawny boy is an accomplishment for myself. So
Okay.
I guess in that respect I'm proud of what I did there.
Most of the soldiers I've spoken to have had little or no understanding of the political causes of the wars in which they have fought. Often this is the case even after they have left the military.
I suppose at that point, it was everywhere. Terrorists come from the Middle East. They're all Muslims or Islamic extremists. And Afghanistan, I suppose, not so much Iraq. I understood a little bit different that was, but Afghanistan harboured the enemy, and they didn't want us there. So I suppose that's why I saw terrorists being like.
Yeah.
And they, terrorists were going to have, explosives all on them and all the rest of it. That's sort of like the caricature you drew up about them, that's what they were.
During training there was no reference or no legitimization for what we were going to do. We knew that we were going to go to Iraq. We knew that in training. Some people were going to literally come out of training, no leave, straight to battalion, straight on up-tag, straight out. And I know a few people that have done that, and I also know people who were in my platoon training who've also been killed as a result. Some of them that were literally just out of training, not even settled in battalion, straight out.
What we were told was that we were going to try and stop the opium fields from being grown and give them some alternative source of of plantation. But then when we went out there, it actually changed. I think whether or not the powers went out there with the same information we were given, I don't know, but things soon heated up. And I think it changed to fighting the enemy. There was nothing to do with, or there wasn't a great deal of things to do with opium fields once things changed.
Halfway through our tour of Afghanistan, the operation became an international security assistance force mission. Personally, it was never explained to me what this meant. I asked Glenn, who was on the same tour with me, if he grasped this at the time.
When it changed, no. Just told it changed to ISAF
And you didn't know what ISAF was?
No, just knew it was an organisation. What it meant, no one told me. I never even asked, to be honest.
As an SAS soldier, Ben Griffin operated at a higher level than us grunts. I asked him how he viewed this lack of understanding among normal soldiers.
You want a soldier to go to Afghanistan, to go to Iraq and carry out the tasks that have been assigned to them. Difficult tasks, difficult situation to work in. They're probably already carrying from their civilian life or from their civilian friends an element of why are we here? What's this all about? Is this genuine? Is the reason I've been given for being here genuine? So that the soldier is probably already carrying that in some degree or other. And for the military, I just don't see, it's not in the military's interests to add to that sort of body of thought.
Lindsay German believes this situation reflects a broader sense of confusion in British society.
Well, I think if you look at British politics in general, you find that most people don't get a very strong sense of what is politically involved in, particularly in foreign policy. That foreign policy is all goodies and baddies, and Britain is always the goodies, and whoever are the baddies. It could have been the Vietnamese, or it could have been the people in Aden back in the 1960s. Today it's the Afghans, it's the Iraqis, it's the Syrians, it's all these kind of things. So you get this very simplistic view. And certainly the stories that are told to these soldiers is that you are going there to help people, you're going there to protect people, you're going there to stop a terrible government from regaining control. And this is the kind of thing that you're told all the time. You're not told the much wider picture of why these things happen, let alone a view of a wider sense of what the economic system is like, which leads to these wars and which leads to military conflict. And of course, you're not told of the very great levels of discontent in the countries that the soldiers go to with the occupying soldiers. In Afghanistan, we're now seeing repeatedly killing of American and British soldiers by the Afghan army and police, who are supposed to be the same people that they're training up to replace them. I mean, this doesn't give you any confidence that what is happening in these countries is actually something which is helping the local population.
But surely the military has to operate in this way.
Do you think, can I just ask you one, do you think the army would work better differently?
I don't know. That is a very good question. It's a very good question. I mean, there are obviously legal precedents where there's a point that you can go past which you can't say, I was just following orders.
The argument that the military has to operate in this top-down way seems perfectly valid, but is there another way? This seems to be one of the most important questions with regards to how soldiers are trained and how armies operate. I asked Neil Faulkner, a military historian, what this reality said about the British Army.
Well, I think one of the characteristics of a modern, if I can use this term, bourgeois army, capitalist army, an army controlled by a capitalist state, representing a capitalist state, is that you can't allow it to be democratic. You can't allow a debate to be going on among those who are being asked to do the fighting, because the real reason why they're fighting is not the reasons that are fed to them, but it's in order to serve the interests of their rulers. So you can't allow a debate to develop about that, because people might turn around and say, well, we're not going to do that. And it's very interesting to make a comparison between the way in which, say, the modern British Army operates and the way in which armies representing the interests of ordinary people have operated in the past, historically, when they are indeed democratic. If you look, for example, at the new model army that fought and won the English Revolution in the 17th century, it was a ferment of debate. If you look at the Red Army during the Russian Revolution, it was a ferment of debate. If you look at the anti-fascist militias that fought in Spain between 1936 and 1939, the same again, a ferment of debate. And that's quite a good test, really, of whose interests are being represented. If the officers permit lots of debate, the implication is that the war is being fought in the interests of those who are developing their own political understanding of what they're doing. If the policy is to suppress all debate and just to say to people, you don't think, you don't discuss, you just obey orders, you have to ask a question about whose interest you're actually serving.
So there you have it. An army can be at once democratic as well as being effective in combat. The reason that some armies are top-down is less about effectiveness and more about the particular interests that army serves. So once the soldiers have completed training to serve in a professional Western army, they are ready to deploy to Afghanistan or Iraq. Ready or not, their lives belong to the Oxbridge elite who run the country.
Get the soldiers to focus on surviving the tour. Get the soldiers to focus on their area of operations. Forget about Afghanistan, forget about Helmand, you're in this town. You're concerned with the operational situation in this town, in this area. Your battalion's performance is what matters. The bigger picture is irrelevant.
Matt Horn recalled the practical advice he was given on dealing with the envisioned enemy in Iraq.
It's best to shoot them from afar, because the closer they get, the harder it is. Because the more human features start to appear.